Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramakrishnaya. Letters of Swami Vivekananda. Arise, awake, onward. I only tell you this, that whoever reads this letter will imbibe my spirit. Have faith, onward, Swami Vivekananda. Letter number 12. Written to Swami Akhandananda from Ghazipur, February 1890. Beloved Akhandananda. Salutation to Bhagavan Ramakrishna. Beloved Akhandananda, very glad to receive your letter. What you have written about Tibet is very promising, and I shall try to go there once. In Sanskrit, Tibet is called the Uttara Kuruvarsha and is not a land of Mlechas. Being the highest stable land in the world, it is extremely cold. But by degrees one may become accustomed to it. About the manners and customs of the Tibetans, you have written nothing. If they are so hospitable, why did they not allow you to go on? Please write everything in detail in a long letter. I am sorry to learn that you will not be able to come, for I had a great longing to see you. It seems that I love you more than all others. However, I shall try to get rid of this Maya too. The Tantrika rites among the Tibetans that you have spoken of arose in India itself during the decline of Buddhism. It is my belief that the Tantras in vogue amongst us were the creation of the Buddhists themselves. Those Tantrika rites are even more dreadful than our doctrine of Vamachara, for in them adultery got a free rein, and it was only when the Buddhists became demoralized through immorality that they were driven away by Kumarila Bhatta. As some sannyasins speak of Shankara or the bowels of Sri Chaitanya, that he was in secret an epicure, a drunkard, and one addicted to all sorts of abominable practice. So, the modern Tantrika Buddhists speak of the Lord Buddha as a dire Vamachari and give an obscene interpretation to the many beautiful precepts of the Prajna Paramita, such as the Tattva Gatha and the like. The result of all this has been that the Buddhists are divided into two sects nowadays. The Burmese and the Sinhalese have generally set the Tantras at naught, have likewise banished the Hindu gods and goddesses, and at the same time have thrown overboard the Amitabha Buddha, held in regard among the Northern school of Buddhists. The long and short of it is that the Amitabha Buddha and the other gods whom the Northern school worship are not mentioned in books like Prajna Paramita, but a lot of gods and goddesses are recommended for worship. And the southern people have willfully transgressed the Shastras and eschewed the gods and goddesses. The phase of Buddhism which declares everything for others, and which you find spread throughout Tibet, has greatly struck modern Europe. Concerning that phase, however, I have a good deal to say, which it is impossible to do in this letter. What Buddha did was to break wide open the gates of that very religion which was confined in the Upanishads to a particular caste. What special greatness does his theory of nirvana confer on him? His greatness lies in his unrivaled sympathy. The high orders of samadhi, etc., that lend gravity to his religion are almost all there in the Vedas. What are absent there are his intellect and heart, which have never since been paralleled throughout the history of the world. The Vedic doctrine of karma is the same as in Judaism and all other religions, that is to say, the purification of the mind through sacrifices and such other external means, and Buddha was the first man who stood against it. But the inner essence of the ideas remained as of old. Look at that doctrine of mental exercises which he preached, and that mandate of his to believe in the suttas instead of the Vedas. Caste also remained as of old. Caste was not wholly obsolete at the time of Buddha, but it was now determined by personal qualifications, and those that were not believers in his religion were declared as heretics, all in the old style. Heretic was a very ancient word with the Buddhists, but then they never had recourse to the sword, good souls, and had great toleration. Argument blew up the Vedas. But what is the proof of your religion? Well, put faith in it. The same procedure as in all religions. It was, however, an imperative necessity of the times, and that was the reason of his having incarnated himself. His doctrine is like that of Kapila, but that of Shankara, how far more grand and rational. Buddha and Kapila are always saying the world is full of grief and nothing but that. Flee from it, for your life do. Is happiness altogether absent here? It is a statement of the nature of what the Brahmos say. The world is full of happiness. There is grief, forsooth. But what can be done? Perchance some will suggest that grief itself will appear as happiness when you become used to it by constant suffering. Shankara does not take this line of argument. He says, this world is and is not manifold, yet one. I shall unravel its mystery. I shall know whether grief be there or anything else. I do not flee from it as from a bugbear. I will know all about it. As to the infinite pain that attends its search, well, I am embracing it in its fullest measure. Am I a beast that you frighten me with happiness and misery, decay and death, which are but the outcome of the senses? I will know about it, will give up my life for it. There is nothing to know about in this world. Therefore, if there be anything beyond this relative existence, what the Lord Buddha has designated as Pradnapara, the transcendental, if such there be, I want that alone. Whether happiness attends it or grief, I do not care. What a lofty idea! How grand! The religion of Buddha has reared itself on the Upanishads, and upon that also the philosophy of Shankara. Only Shankara had not the slightest bit of Buddha's wonderful heart, dry intellect merely. For fear of the tantras, for fear of the mob, in his attempt to cure a boil, he amputated the very arm itself. One has to write a big volume if one has to write about them at all. But I have neither the learning nor the leisure for it.